Farage's Brexit bombshell, the opportunity Britain squandered. 8 years after the referendum that shook the establishment to its core, the man who made Brexit happen has delivered his verdict, and it's scathing. Nigel Farage stood before a packed room in the City of London, not to celebrate his greatest political triumph, but to declare it dead on arrival. Brexit, he announced, has been utterly squandered. Not mismanaged, not poorly executed, but squandered entirely. And if you're wondering whether this is just political theater from a man known for dramatics, the uncomfortable truth is that even his fiercest critics are finding it difficult to argue with the substance of what he's saying. If you enjoy deep dives into British politics that cut through the nonsense, do consider subscribing to UK Connors, where we bring you analysis that respects your intelligence and doesn't waste your time. The setting itself told you everything about Farage's ambitions. This wasn't some provincial town hall or a Brexit Party rally in a seaside resort. This was the heart of London financial district, surrounded by corporate titans and economic heavyweights who actually write the checks that keep Britain running. Reform UK's head of policy, Zia Yusuf, set the tone before Farage even took the stage, declaring that both Tories and Labour have run Britain's economy off a cliff and that the country is headed for economic catastrophe unless there's an urgent change of course. Strong words. But when you look at the numbers, when you examine where Britain sits in the global pecking order compared to where it sat in 2016, the hyperbole starts looking rather more like reality. Farage's central thesis is devastatingly simple. Brexit was supposed to unlock Britain's potential through sensible deregulation and global competitiveness. Instead, the regulatory burden on British businesses has actually worsened since 2016. Think about that for a moment. We went through the constitutional upheaval of the century. We endured years of parliamentary deadlock. We watched our politics tear itself apart. Businesses relocated. Our international reputation took a battering. And for what? To end up with more regulation than we started with. It's the kind of outcome that would be comedic if it wasn't so tragic. The opportunity to become a nimble, competitive force in the global economy has been, in Farage's words, completely squandered. And when pressed on specifics, he didn't hold back. Regulations haven't just stayed the same, they've multiplied. Regulators haven't become more business-friendly, they've become more hostile. The entire promise of Brexit, the economic rationale that convinced millions to take the leap, has been betrayed by the very governments that claim to be delivering it. But this wasn't just a speech about Brexit nostalgia. Farage came armed with predictions that should make Sir Keir Starmer's blood run cold. He forecasted that market nervousness around gilt yield will force Rachel Reeves into a genuine austerity budget within 2 budgets, which will split the Labour Party down the middle. His prediction? A general election in 2027, 2 years early, triggered by economic collapse. Now, you might dismiss this as wishful thinking from a man who's made a career out of being a political disruptor, but Farage has formed when it comes to reading the political weather. He bet his career on Brexit when the entire establishment said it was impossible. He predicted the Tory implosion that delivered Labour a landslide. Underestimate him at your peril. The economic proposals Reform UK unveiled are designed to position them as a serious alternative when that predicted crisis arrives. Farage promised the most pro-business, pro-entrepreneurship government in modern British history. He pledged sweeping deregulation, immediate removal of inheritance tax on family farms and family-run businesses, and a fundamental rethink of how Britain approaches taxation. But here's where it gets interesting, and where Farage showed his learning from past mistakes. He explicitly rode back from Reform's 2024 manifesto promise to cut £90 billion in taxes. Why? Because, he admitted, Labour and the Tories have wrecked the public finances so thoroughly that Reform would need to get public spending under control first before any substantial tax cuts could be delivered. It's a moment of fiscal realism from a man not historically known for restraint, and it suggests Reform UK is trying to shed its image as a party of impossible promises. The devil, as always, lurks in the details. Farage wants to scrap all net zero subsidies to bring down energy costs. He wants to reverse the North Sea oil and gas taxes imposed by Jeremy Hunt and expanded by Rachel Reeves. He is calling for the biggest council house building program ever, which could cost tens of billions. He is promising to increase the tax-free personal allowance from its frozen level of £12,750. And in a significant clarification that will delight some and infuriate others, he explained that his promise to scrap the 2-child benefit cap would apply only to British working couples, framed as a tax credit to offset childcare costs and incentivize both work and larger families. It's classic Farage, wrapping economic policy in cultural messaging that speaks directly to his base whilst giving. The reactions were swift and predictable, yet revealing in their intensity. Labour's response was pure theatre, accusing Farage of promising a return to damaging austerity while simultaneously complaining that the minimum wage is too high for young workers and doubling down on what they termed a golden giveaway to foreign billionaires. They claimed reform would slash the NHS, schools, and pensions whilst cancelling investment in infrastructure. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride for the Conservatives was equally scathing, pointing out that Farage didn't clarify which of his £140 billion of previous commitments still stood, questioned the fiscal restraint of promising the biggest council house building program ever, and noted that reform appears wedded to nationalisation without compensation to shareholders, which would devastate pension pots and private investment. Both attacks have merit. Both expose contradictions in reform's positioning, and yet both also rather miss the point. Because what Farage understands, what his critics in the established parties seem constitutionally incapable of grasping, is that millions of voters no longer care about policy consistency or fiscal orthodoxy in the traditional sense. They care about the feeling that someone is finally saying what they're thinking. When Farage declares that hard-left socialist dogma about taxing the rich has infected virtually the entirety of the political class, when he argues that driving away high earners will force higher taxes on everyone else, when he positions himself as a defender of aspiration against the forces of envy, he is not trying to win over economic policy wonks. He is speaking to the electrician who's sick of being told his privilege, the small business owner drowning in regulations, the pensioner who feels like a stranger in the country they built. John O'Connell from the Taxpayers Alliance offered perhaps the most nuanced response, praising Farage for positioning spending reductions at the heart of his fiscal policy and noting that targeting public sector pensions suggests genuine seriousness about the scale of the challenge. But he also warned that delaying tax cuts could mean denying them altogether, pointing out that the average household now pays well over £1 million in tax over a lifetime. It's a reminder that reform space in British politics exists precisely because neither Labour nor the Conservatives have credible answers to the fundamental question: how do we maintain the services people demand whilst not bankrupting those who pay for them? The setting of Farage's speech, that grand room in the City of London packed with corporate representatives, tells you where reform thinks its next battle will be fought. They are not just courting the traditional protest vote anymore. They are positioning themselves as a party that understands business, that gets entrepreneurship, that won't demonize success or drive wealth creators abroad. It's a calculated pitch to the economically literate who are increasingly alienated by both main parties. Whether it works remains to be seen, but the fact that this many corporate figures showed up suggests at least some appetite for what Farage is selling. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander's completely unrelated comments about the train stabbing incident, praising emergency services and the heroic train staff, serve as a jarring reminder of the other crises facing Britain whilst politicians argue about fiscal policy and Brexit dividends. The suspect wasn't known to counter-terrorism police or MI5, wasn't on any watch list, just another tragedy in what feels like an increasingly fragile society. Alexander insisted public transport remains safe, citing 27 crimes per million passenger journeys, but her acknowledgement that one crime is one too many and the promise to review all security measures speaks to the permanent state of defensive governance that characterizes modern Britain. Back to Farage's economic vision, and the central tension in everything he's proposing. He wants massive deregulation whilst promising the biggest council house building program in history. He wants to cut public spending whilst protecting pensions and the NHS from what he considers Labour's predations. He wants to position reform as fiscally responsible whilst maintaining crowd-pleasing policies that have obvious costs. He wants to attract high earners whilst building council houses. He is trying to be simultaneously the party of aspiration and the party of the left-behind working class. It's a political tightrope that may prove impossible to walk, but then again, everyone said Brexit was impossible too. The fundamental question Farage poses to the British establishment is simple and uncomfortable. If Brexit has been squandered, who's responsible? The Conservatives who delivered it but failed to capitalise on it? Labour who opposed it and now govern without any vision for making it work? The civil service that allegedly sabotaged it? Or perhaps the British people themselves for not demanding more from their politicians? Farage, predictably, blames everyone except himself and the voters who backed him. But his criticism of successive governments rings true even to many who despise him. Britain did vote for economic liberation and global competitiveness. What we got was a different flag on the same regulations and a political class that seemed more interested in managing decline than seizing opportunity. Whether you think Farage is a prophet or a charlatan, whether you believe Brexit was Britain's salvation or its greatest self-inflicted wound, this speech matters because it articulates a growing sense that the country is adrift. GDP growth exists only because of mass migration. The tax burden is the highest since World War II. Energy costs are among the world's most expensive. Productivity is stagnant. The political class from both main parties offers nothing but variations on the same failed theme. Into this vacuum steps Farage, older now, using notes for perhaps the first time in years, surrounded by policy wonks trying to add intellectual heft to his populist appeal, promising that Reform UK will do things very differently. The most pro-business government in modern British history. The end of net zero subsidies. North Sea oil and gas unleashed. Inheritance tax abolished for family farms. The two-child benefit cap removed for British working couples. Mass deregulation. Lower energy costs. More well-paid jobs. Everything you wanted from Brexit but never got. The establishment's response tells you they're worried. When both Labour and the Conservatives deploy their shadow chancellors and party spokespeople to immediately attack a speech, when they coordinate messaging about austerity and fiscal irresponsibility and failed promises, when they point to reform-run councils raising taxes as evidence of hypocrisy, they are not dismissing Farage as irrelevant. They are treating him as a genuine threat. Because the uncomfortable truth neither wants to admit is that he's diagnosed a disease correctly even if his cure might kill the patient. Britain is in economic trouble. Brexit hasn't delivered what was promised. The regulatory burden has worsened. Taxes are too high. Growth is anemic. The political class has failed. These aren't controversial statements. They are simply facts. Farage's prediction of a 2027 election triggered by economic collapse might sound like fantasy, but think about the trajectory. If gilt yields continue rising, if Rachel Reeves is forced into genuine austerity, if the Labour left revolts, if growth continues to disappoint, if immigration remains at current levels while services deteriorate, if the gap between what politicians promise and what they deliver keeps widening, then why wouldn't there be a political crisis? We've already seen how quickly the seemingly impossible becomes inevitable in British politics. We've watched governments fall, movements rise, orthodoxies shatter. The idea that Labour will enjoy 5 comfortable years in power assumes a stability that simply doesn't exist anymore. So here we stand, 8 years after the Brexit referendum, listening to its chief architect declare his life's work a failure of implementation if not vision. Britain voted to take back control, and instead got more of the same with added complications. We voted for global competitiveness and got more regulation. We voted for economic freedom and got higher taxes. We voted for change and got continuity with worse optics. Whether Farage and Reform UK represent the solution or simply more chaos is the question that will define the next chapter of British politics. But one thing is certain, the establishment parties have run out of road, run out of ideas, and increasingly run out of time. The squandered promise of Brexit might yet prove to be just the opening act in Britain's economic and political transformation. And if Farage's predictions prove even half right, 2027 is going to be a year that makes 2016 look like a warm-up act. Stay sharp, stay informed, and keep watching UK Corners for the analysis that cuts through the noise.